All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Peace in Palestine event. My name is J.R. Forasteros. I'm the lead pastor of the Haven Collective, and I'm going to have Sue introduce all of our panelists here in a minute, but I wanted to say welcome. We are very excited that you are with us tonight. I think it's going to be a very, very important conversation. And I wanted to lay some ground rules right here at the top. First of all, this is going to be a conversation among the three of us who are a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim who all care about peace in Palestine. And we're all coming from different perspectives, but I think we all have largely the same goal. This is my friend Sue. I'm pointing where she is on my screen. Sue is over there. She's going to be moderating for us. So she's going to be kind of steering the conversation, guiding the conversation. So I'm going to hand it off to her here in just a minute. And then we also have a behind the scenes producer named Josh who is with us. Josh is going to be moderating the chat on the live stream and making sure that we get all of your questions because we are going to do an extensive Q&A time. So Josh, if you would just sort of like show off a little bit how we're going to be highlighting the Q&A whenever someone makes a fun comment or has a question, we're going to be able to throw that up on the screen just like that. Ooh, look at there. And so, yeah, we'll give you your 15 seconds of fame along with us. But seriously, as we are talking, because we're going to talk for quite a while, just the three of us, if there's a question that occurs to you, go ahead and put it in the chat. You don't have to wait until the Q&A. You can put it in the chat. Josh will make a record of that, and then we will get to when we get to the Q&A section, he's going to be handing those questions off to Sue to do that. So again, we're really, really excited to have you guys with us for this chat. I think it's super important, and I wanted to lay a couple of rules down. First of all, the goal for this conversation, as we've been talking about it behind the scenes and getting ready for it, is not consensus, but real conversation. We are here to learn from each other, to learn from each other's perspectives and worldviews. None of them are we're not trying to convince each other. We're not trying to proselytize or evangelize each other. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can all, as people of the Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, come together around the cause of peace because of what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now. And so with that in mind, we know that this is a very emotional topic. We know that it's very fraught. We know that it's incredibly complex and complicated because we're dealing with like thousands of years of history and, you know, different cultures and all of that kind of stuff. So we're just asking for all of you who are with us tonight to join us in a peaceful and respectful chat. We've asked Josh as the moderator to just be very careful. We don't know what kinds of people might want to come and try to sabotage this or troll or something like that. And so we've asked him to be fairly liberal with the moderating, and that if we see people who are clearly not here in order to participate in a good faith conversation, to remove them from the chat. It'll be up to him whether you get warnings or not. I told him, again, what we care about most is the safety and the sanctity of this conversation. And that means that we don't want people who are coming in to try to derail that or sabotage that, because I mean, people are literally dying in the Middle East right now because of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. So without any further ado, I want to hand it over to Sue so she can get us all introduced and we can dive into the conversation. So Sue, if you would take us away.
Yeah, thank you, JR. My name is Sue Sweeney, and I am a member of Haven Collective. And it's really an honor this evening to be able to have this opportunity to moderate this discussion. I want to start with some introductions so that everybody in the audience gets to know who's on our panel tonight. And then there will be two parts. The first part will be conversation. And then the second part, part two, will be open to question and answer. So I hope that you'll be thinking about what questions you want to ask so we can further the discussion. But with us this evening, we have Ustad Abdulla al Mamun is a member of the board of directors at the Sachse Muslim Society and overseeing religious services at the Sachse Masjid. He also serves as the Senior Director of Advancement at Bayan Islamic Graduate School, leading organizational development and student recruitment. He holds a BA in Middle Eastern Studies and Business Administration from Fordham University and pursued graduate studies in graphics communication management and technology at New York University. He lives in Murphy, Texas with his wife and 3 sons. So I'm glad to have him here tonight. And then also we have Rabbi Eliyahu Fink. Is a rabbi in Suffern, New York. For nearly 7 years, Rabbi Fink was the rabbi at the famous Shul on the Beach in Venice, California, where he built an online community with his blog. Is that a California baseball hat you have on there, Eli? Okay, that's what I was thinking. That makes sense then. He built an online community with his blog, finkerswim.com, and then nascent social media networks. And for several years, wrote a weekly column for the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles called The Soul of Hollywood, where he explored popular culture and religion. He's a frequent contributor and guest to interfaith dialogue groups and events, including Seeds of Peace and New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. So thank you, Eli, for being here tonight. And then also we have J.R. Forasteros. And he is the lead pastor of Haven Collective, an experimental, relationship-driven gathering of people from across the country. He's pastored in 3 states over more than 20 years. He is the author of Empathy for the Devil and a columnist at Sojourners. He co-hosts the fascinating podcast, and he lives with his partner, Amanda, in Dallas, Texas. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this started. To kick things off, would each of you please tell us about the specific incarnation of your religion that you practice? How did you start, and how do you explain to outsiders what makes your particular faith distinctive?
Who do you want us to start with?
Okay, sorry. Well, let me give a little more context here. We know that Abdullah, of course, is Sunni Islam, and then Eli is Orthodox Judaism, and then JR is Evangelical Christianity. So I think I'll just go in alphabetical order here, and we'll go with Abdullah. So tell us a little bit about your faith journey, and how do you explain to outsiders what makes your faith distinctive?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I look forward to a lively conversation. Secondly, I must confess, this is my first interfaith conversation ever on camera, at least. I've had interactions with many individuals of different faiths and intra-faiths, but never on camera. So this is going to be my first effort. So God willing, this is going to be, I hope this is not the last. To answer your question, let me give you some context. There's about 1.7, almost 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. And there are no one Muslim alike. Although the majority of the Muslim world, I would say about 75 to 80%, are considered Sunni Muslim or Orthodox Sunni Islam. What Sunni typically means when you hear Sunni and Shia is Sunnis are those that follow the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So when we say we are a Sunni Muslim, or this particular group is a Sunni Muslim, they follow the tradition. So they follow what the tradition of the Prophet and his companions, or the people that were following him while he was alive. That understanding of Islam is from a theological as well as a legal perspective. That understanding is what we say, understand Sunni Islam to be. When we hear Shia or the Shia Muslim or Shia Islam, that typically means in our context or in our terms, we usually call them Ahl al-Bayt, meaning the people of the house, or they follow the imamat or imams directly. Although within Sunni Islam, you also have an imam, but in our case, an imam is not like a priest, but more of a individual who is religiously learned or has certain religious qualification and typically leads the prayer. Whereas in Shia Islam, it is a divine authority or a divine tradition that they follow. So from my context, I'm originally from Bangladesh, which is predominantly Muslim, almost 90% Sunni Islam. And within that, there are 4 or 5 different jurisprudence or ways of interpreting the tradition or interpreting the law. So we call that madhab or jurisprudence, so or legal thoughts or legal school of thoughts. And typically the largest group within Sunni Islam is called the Hanafi school of thought. So if you look at the Indian subcontinent, whether it be in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, or Sri Lanka or Nepal, one of these places, typically you have people that follow this school of thought. So they usually have a similar concept. However, you have all these different variations, but ultimately it comes down to this concept, which is how you take the rule of your practice, or how do you take the rule of practicing the faith, and that is by looking at the tradition, by looking at what the companions and the prophet said in their tradition. So for me, I grew up here in the US. I grew up in the Bronx, to be more specific. And there is where I learned my Islam, my understanding of Islam, and the variations that are out there. So one of the unique opportunities that I've had is that because I grew up in the 90s in the Bronx, I was very much alone in the sense that I needed to figure out what my identity and who I was. So because I was different from others, because I have been, I was able to grow up and figure out my own identity, I was able to study everyone else. So I can, at least I try to eloquently explain where my background is. Today's, in this conversation, even this clothing that I have is actually from Bangladesh, from where I was, where I was born. And this is like an ethnic clothing. So for me, my religious background is Sunni Islam, who has a Hanafi background, who is from Bangladesh. So that is practicing Islam here in the United States. So I just try to take it from a large group to as defined as possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Abdullah. I do think that it's important to note that, you brought up about how many people in the world are Muslim, and it's approximately 25% of the world's population, right? But no 2 Muslims are the same, right? And so when we teach students in geography in high school about religions, we often say that Christianity and Islam are universalizing religions, and where Judaism is a more ethnic religion. And I think that mainly means that Islam and maybe Christianity are a religion that doesn't really hold to a specific part of the world necessarily. You can have people from all over the world in all kinds of different countries, even though there's some places that are considered more significant to the religious practice than others. And so that's kind of a difference between Christianity and Islam and Judaism. So Eli, can you tell us a little bit about what is your religious practice, and how do you explain to outsiders what makes your faith distinctive?
Sure. Thanks for having me. And it's nice to meet you, Sue. Nice to meet you, Abdullah. And it was a pleasure listening to your really excellent and eloquent explanation of your personal background. I hope I can share as well as you did. That was impressive. What I would say is this, that just to come right off of your last point there, Sue, is that Judaism is 2 things. It's 2 things that are very connected, but also completely separate. One is there's a religion of Judaism. It's a legal religion. There's stuff to do. There's a Bible. We follow the Old Testament, but not in the way that it's read literally. It's interpreted by rabbinic authorities going back 2,500 years. So there's books that have been written since the times before Jesus that explained what the different commandments were in the Bible. And we've been reinterpreting them and discussing them and figuring out how to do them as times change ever since then. That is the legal part of the religion, and anyone can study it, and anyone could become a part of it. If you'd like to become a Jewish religious person, anybody's welcome. Another part of Judaism that is different is that it's also a family. Technically, I would say, there's been converts to Judaism over the years, but it's extremely small minority. Jews have never proselytized, and in fact, the rule in Judaism is when somebody says they want to convert, you have to tell them that they shouldn't at least 3 times before they're even given a chance to study. And then once they study, they're like, okay, yeah, I don't want this. But it's very different. Most religions are looking to acquire more adherents, and the Jewish faith has never actually been that way. Even going back to the Old Testament, when the Israelites, I guess we're getting into our topic a little bit here, when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River and they started to conquer the land of Canaan, they were not expecting the newly conquered nations to become Jewish. They did not have to, and they did not. There's a special rule that's in the Old Testament. You could look it up in Deuteronomy. It talks about it a lot, called a ger toshav in Hebrew, which is a resident who lives like a friendly resident, which meant that they just were not allowed to do certain things that were very antithetical to Judaism. And they had to be like, friends, but they didn't have to convert. And that's kind of weird and interesting when you think about how religions have spread throughout the world. So really, most Jews are related, even the ones that are from the Far East and the ones that are from the Far West and the Far North and the Far South. The Jewish diaspora is over 2,500 years old, going back, I would say 800 years before Jesus lived. There were already Jews that had been spread across a little bit towards the West, but also even more so towards the East of Israel. So the people who are Jewish today are almost all either descendants from Abraham, but also Isaac and Jacob. So we have 3 forefathers. And if you're not a direct descendant from them, you are usually a convert because you converted for family, or you converted for marriage, or you converted for, very specific personal reasons, not because they were ever coerced or asked even to convert. So Jewish people all over the world are, they all go back to the same time and place, which is why it's a unique phenomenon in Jewish life that people from all over the world have very different, I would say, flavors, or the way that they appear on the outside of their practices, but they kind of all do the same thing as well, right? So there's the stuff that people do, and then there's the way it's done and the way it looks, and it could feel very different. For one group, you could look at them and you're like, wow, this seems very, I would say, like very Western European, right? That's a certain vibe you can get from their practice. Others, you can see them, you're like, wow, this is 100% Middle Eastern. Like the music sounds exactly like Middle Eastern music. And you can have people that have already acculturated to their new places where they live. Jews have always been wandering around the world. No place has been home to Jews for like more than 1,000 years, I would say. The place we were the longest, not coincidentally, was Germany. Going back to the previous, what I mentioned, like the first diaspora started, there were Jews that went to that area and they stayed there for 2,300, 400 years. But that's the thing with Judaism, is that we are all part of a family, and our practices, what you call Orthodox Judaism, is the people who take the practices most seriously. They're the ones who want to be as dedicated as possible to keep that religious practice going. But even the people who have no idea what Judaism is about religiously, and even if they have no care for their Jewishness religiously, they can't un-Jew. They're Jewish because their parents are Jewish and because their grandparents are Jewish. They could convert to some other religion, but by our standard, that's no such thing as a conversion. You're just still a Jew. You could just be an apostate Jew, but your Jewishness is who you are as a person. That's like your last name. It's like your parents, it's your grandparents, and that it connects all Jews around the world. And that I'd say, it's a great question. I could talk about Judaism for years, right? But to speak about the specific thing that is, I think, unique in this conversation is the family aspect to it.
Yeah, and I like how. Thank you for that. And I really like how we're bringing geography into this discussion. And I want to maybe kind of badly summarize some world history here, and then JR, I'll ask your question, and then maybe you can fix whatever I say here. Because I'm getting like some good back channel questions here too. So what we have our panel here today, and when we think about Islam and Judaism and Christianity, we call these monotheistic religions, right? And so and when we think about geography, in world history, these religions kind of started in the same place in the world, in what we now call Southwest Asia or Middle East, or in history, the area called the Fertile Crescent, with these river civilizations. And so as far as history goes, right, you have the tradition, well, you brought up a good point, Eli, where it's really Judaism is kind of two things to oversimplify. It's the practice, and then it's the family too. And so you have in history Judaism, and then secondly, if you familiar with the Bible, right? That the Old Testament is we kind of think about as the more Jewish part, right? And the New Testament being the more Christian part. And then Islam came along, I think maybe about 600 years after that, approximately. And so all of these traditions, religious traditions, are, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that we're all three are focused on the same God. The mono being one God, which distinguishes it from other types of religious traditions around the world that are polytheistic, like Hinduism, where there's multiple gods. It's really what's super important to these three religions is there is no God but God. There's one God. And sometimes that discussion lies some of the nuances that make the religion slightly different. But I also am glad that you all have talked about the different sects within your religious tradition. We talked about there's 25% of the world's population is Muslim. It's Sunni and Shia. Most of those are Sunni Muslims, and Sunni Muslims are geographically spread all over the world. There's, of course, Shiite Muslims in multiple places, but it's kind of concentrated more in one kind of area in Southwest Asia. And then, of course, we have Jews all over the world too, but there's that sense of family as well, and that really ties them back to the same geographic area. And then Christianity kind of gets on the bandwagon with all this too. So JR, can you talk to us a little bit about Christianity, and how do you explain to outsiders what makes Christianity distinctive?
Yeah, well, and I think I'll be even more specific than that and say I come out of evangelical Christianity, which is a relatively new branch of Christianity. I mean, if you're talking about the Catholic or the Orthodox Christianities, they can trace their roots all the way back to the first followers of Jesus, the apostles, Peter and Paul and James and all those people. But evangelicalism really is a movement or a way of being Christian that comes after the Enlightenment, that has a much stronger focus on reason and thinking. So like one of the hallmarks of evangelicalism is conversionism, which is this idea that people have to decide to stop being one thing and start being a Christian. And if, as weird as it sounds, I think especially to probably anyone who's familiar with modern Christianity, like Christianity before the modern era was a lot less concerned with conversionism of individuals. They would more go in and take over an area and sort of like mass convert everyone by sometimes appropriating their holidays, for instance, if you know about like Christmas and Easter and how those did not start out as Christian holidays, things like that, right? And so this idea that individuals would need to make a conscious decision to stop doing one thing and start doing the Jesus thing is like a relatively recent sort of idea. It's also, evangelicalism is also pretty distinctively US American, with its like high focus on the individual over the collective, with its high focus on like personal responsibility and personal liberty. There's a lot. I mean, again, there's been lots of ink spilled about how difficult it is to disentangle evangelical Christendom from like 20th century American politics. And so I think really, especially when it comes to what we call the Middle East, right? When you go back to the fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, and the fact that Western powers, which were very heavily influenced by evangelicalism at that point, were carving up the Middle East into the many of the countries that we identify today, that had a lot of evangelical influence. And then I know we're going to talk about the Zionist movement here in a minute. There were a lot of Christian Zionists who were Christians that were advocating for an Israeli state for reasons that I think were less altruistic than a lot of people realize. And a lot of that was specifically from evangelicals because of the particular kind of beliefs that evangelicals have about the end of the world. Which again, I'll get into in a little bit, right? But all of that is to say, like, to be an evangelical Christian, I think I have to acknowledge that this is not like a Muslim versus Jew conflict, and the Christians are just sitting off to the side going, gosh, I hope those guys can figure it out. Like, we have been alternately throwing kerosene on the fire and sometimes lighting the match in a lot of ways. And so I think that's one of the reasons I was excited to have, a three-way interfaith dialogue, because this really is something that all three of our religions are involved in. And it's not just because Jerusalem is a really special place to all three religions, though, again, geography plays an inescapable part of it. So I don't know if I answered that well enough, but that's kind of where I'm coming from, really, really specifically, like not just as a Christian, but as an evangelical.
Yeah, I think it's important, when you talk about being an evangelical and that Christianity has been around a while as well. And as Christians, you got to, for our audience, you got to remember that all of these religions originally started in kind of the same geographic place. And then as people moved out, right, they kind of expanded their identity to include other things and other cultural elements as well. And then as Christianity moved into the United States, well, a lot of people, a lot of Christians for a good piece of history could not read, right? So once they finally got a Bible in their hands that wasn't in Latin, they started interpreting it in different ways, and then moved to the United States and moved westward and became isolated from one another and started reading and interpreting their Bible differently and getting different ideas about things. And so you get those differences. I want to move into talking about a little bit more about the history, because I think many people in our audience understand, you have the historical, the ancient civilization of the Israelites. And then for a lot of us, there's like some stuff happens. And then kind of in the area of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, around World War I and into World War II, like some stuff happens that I may have learned in my U.S. history class or not. And then like it kind of goes from there. And so I think, and I'm going to have Eli, I'm going to have you go first so you can speak to this a little bit more. But if you could tell us a little bit, and you did speak to it a little bit already, about the historical establishment of Israel and then the establishment of the modern state of Israel, and what exactly is Zionism. And you get 10 bonus points for me if you mention the Balfour Declaration as well.
Well, I'll take those 3 points. Or maybe not. Well, you ask a question, you get the answer. It's going to be a long one, but I'm going to make it short.
Good.
Here's the thing. I'm going to go to the present first. In the present, the word Zionism does not mean what it meant until the present. So what it means today is it depends on who's saying it. For some people, it's a pejorative. It's like nationalism or any other ethnocentric sort of, I don't know, belief system, a supremacist type of thing. And it's fair to say that. I'm not saying that that's unfair. I'd say it's wrong, but it's unfair. It's not unfair. The reason it's not unfair is because, you know, all those things that I just mentioned, those nationalistic, supremacist types of groups, they all end in isms too, right? Like America's the exception that we have like MAGA, but in other countries, right? So you have nationalism, fascism, and like, oh, Zionism goes with those. So I think it's fair for people who are just hearing a word to kind of put those in the same category. And then, you know, that's where they start from. But like I would say, I'm going to give a rough estimate of 98.6% of Jews, Zionism has nothing to do with that. I mean, I'm sure, yes, we have our own supremacists. Every group does. Specifically in Israel, there's some political supremacists who are a problem, actually, for most people. Like they're not considered the good guys, and everybody else is like, we're just not as strong as them. They're just like, they're off the reservation. If you're not a supremacist, but you're a Zionist, what are you? So what does that mean? So now we go back in history. Zion, the word, is as old as the Bible. It goes back to Samuel. As far as Jews are concerned, my ancestors, we have, you know, you read it in the Old Testament. There was the Solomon's Temple. Solomon's Temple got destroyed, and the Jews were exiled to Babylonia. They were there for, I don't know, 70 years or so. The entire time that they were there, the only thing they wanted to do was to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. And eventually, with the help of Ezra and Nehemiah, they actually did so 7 years later. So just to think about this, most religious or ethnic groups from, you know, the the Iron Age, if they got exiled, they were gone. So, you know, we talk about it, ever hear about the 10 lost tribes of Israel? That's what happened to those guys. So, you know, 10 out of 12, not such great numbers, but 10 out of 12 did assimilate into other groups, and they're not lost like we're going to find them somewhere with like around a campfire and we're like, oh, we found the lost tribes. Like I found my wallet. No, they're lost because they are gone. They completely were enveloped into the society they were captured in. Like most places, like that's what happens. The majority takes over the minority. What happened with Jews in this first exile was that somehow they kept their faith, but also they kept their ethnicity and their desires to return. And that was unique. And that's the story of the Esther story, if you're familiar with that from the Old Testament, is actually it's about this exact point. That Haman says, there's these group of people that live in this whole, we have a huge country here of all these different ethnicities that we conquered. And there's one group that wants to be their own people. They're crazy. Get rid of them. And Ahasuerus is like, yeah, that makes sense. Get rid of those guys. So it was a weird thing. I'm pointing that out for a reason. So at that point, it began that Jews had this like a homing device that always brought us back to where we became a nation in Israel. We had another temple that was built by, like I said, Ezra and Nehemiah. It was knocked down a couple times. The story of the Hasmoneans and the Maccabees is a story of that temple being somewhat destroyed, got rebuilt after that story. And then we get up to like just about the time of Jesus. Herod, I'm sure you all know who he is if you have any familiarity with that time period. Herod rebuilt the second temple. He made it really nice. And if you ever see a model of what the second temple looked like, that's Herod's temple. He was a really good builder. That's as much as we could say about him that was good. And in fact, the Talmud, which is the book of Jewish thought and law from that time or a little later, they said if anybody didn't see the temple built by Herod, not the temple in general, the temple built by Herod, they never saw a beautiful building in their life. Like he was, even to the rabbis later, they knew that he was the best builder around. So he built this second temple that we know of, and that got destroyed around the time of Jesus. And that was the beginning of the real long exile. And from that moment on, Jews, they started to spread out further west, further east, further north, further south. But from that moment on, there was not one, forget day, not one day, not one wedding, not one circumcision, which is like the initiation rite to every Jewish boy that becomes, that's born 8 days old. There is not one single holiday or Sabbath or any Jewish event where Jerusalem and Zion is not mentioned. This is like, to tell an Orthodox Jew, there's this thing called Zionism that has to do with the state of Israel, they look at you like you're nuts. Nothing to do with each other. When we have a wedding, you've all seen a Jewish wedding or see it on TV or something, they crash, they crack a glass under their foot. The reason they do that is because we want to remember that Jerusalem is still not rebuilt the way it was. Mm-hmm. And there are people who sing a song from Psalms. If I forget Jerusalem, I forget my own right arm. There's every single time that we gather and do any religious event, it's always included in the ritual something that says, we got to go back. Rabbis from the medieval times risked their lives, and some died on the way just trying to get there. And just like so they could kiss the ground and die, right? There's like, Maimonides talks about how he wanted to go. Nachmanides did go, and he was like, he died like 5 minutes after he got there, but that was what he lived for. So to the Jew, Zionism is not a new thing. It's an old thing. Mm-hmm. Along came nationalism and people getting places for their own communities, and the world was being divided up. You know, JR, you said earlier how the world's being divided up. It reminded me of Shogun, where the what's his name? The abominable, what's his name?
The good guy? Oh no, the bad one. Yeah.
The English guy. The English guy.
Anjin.
Anjin. Yeah. Anjin. Right? Anjin says, he's explaining to the world, to the Japanese. He says, so the king of Portugal and Spain took half the world, and he's like, that's ours, and that's ours. And my king in England's like, no, I want that part. Like, the mindset was not even just from the 19th century. It's been going back since medieval times. We're like, I don't know. They had this idea that whatever they see, they could take, but that did exist. So the world's getting divided up. And there are Jews who have been very, very, very persecuted in Europe. I don't know, people know about the Holocaust, but that was just like the culmination of about 1,200 years of really bad times for Jews. Ashkenaz Judaism, which is European Judaism, was nearly destroyed completely over the years through pogroms and through completely difficult to stand edicts and laws enacted by the church. It was bad times. We were not friends. They wanted somewhere to go. They could be safe. And starting already in the late 19th century, some Jews who were not even religious, and this is an important part, this was a secular nationalist movement of people that said, we want to go back to the land of Israel like we always did, but we also want to make a state. But before that, we didn't have to make a state. Before that, the Jews would go to Israel. Whoever was there was there. We came, we're there. Separately, some people decided it was important to make a state. And thank God they did, because when the Holocaust ended, Jews were not being let in anywhere. Like, oh, we're so sorry this happened to you, but you can't come here. So Jews were on boats going to America, to England, to South America, and they were turned away, and they didn't have supplies to get back to wherever they came from, and they died at sea, right? They were refugees and they had nowhere to go. Thank God that Israel came about at that time for Jews' sake. It's not a direct result. It's not that the Holocaust happened so the Jews got a state. And it's not that without the Holocaust, the Jews wouldn't have a state. But it worked out pretty well, because now a Jew can say, I have a place that I can go where I know that I'll never be the minority. Like, we've never been anywhere where we weren't the minority, right? Imagine 2 billion people Christian, 2 billion people Muslim. Like, what are we? 2 million across the world that are like practicing. And I'm at that. Sorry, 2 million was the lowest it ever was after the Holocaust. But we're back up to like 18 million, I think now. But it was not. We don't look at it as a coincidence. So rabbis, religious people at the time of the start of the birth of Israel, 1948, they looked at it as the beginning of Messianic times, because Jews had not been able to return in mass to Israel since the destruction of the temple 2,000 years earlier. They could go one by one here and there, but they couldn't establish their own government. They couldn't establish their own institutions. They were just kind of like the minority. The first time that we were able to be a majority back in our home state was after the Holocaust, the establishment of the state of Israel. And there were people that are very religious. This was not this. They took a secular movement, and they, as religious people, were like, "This is Messianic times for us. Our Messiah is different than yours." With all due respect, so we believe that that's the end of times for us. Is that there would be an ingathering of Jews. I mean, it's all over the prophets. You can read in the Old Testament everywhere, every page you turn. So it became a convergence of a secular nationalist movement with a religious yearning that had been 2,000 years old, and the perfect timing for Jews to have been given a state so that they could find somewhere to go where they were not welcome in other places.
Thank you.
I think that answers your question.
Yeah, no, and I want people to understand, and Abdullah, we're going to go to you next, because the historical context is so important in understanding, because I know people are seeing on the news, there's this conflict happening here. It's awful. We're not really going to solve this disagreement tonight, but I want us to take time to really understand, because I know that people look at the map today and they kind of assume that those boundaries drawn on the map were always there. Or were there for longer than they actually were. And I think for a lot of people, this is a story about underdogs, right? And people who share the same identity, feeling like they're being mistreated, and the people, really are being mistreated. And I also want to put some context to this too. We have a very I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have grown up with such a Western point of view of this history, right? So I want to talk specifically about Palestine, because I want people to understand that you have the Eastern world and the Western world, and for a lot of the history that we learn in school, that Western world is dominated by Christianity and countries that are mainly Christian, and then colonizing and spreading out all over the world as if that was the only thing that was going on. But also you have in Southwest Asia, in East Asia, you have lots and lots of history there and things going on. And so we kind of see where we have all of these monotheistic religions kind of beginning in the same place. Judaism coming several thousand years, I believe, before Christianity, and then Islam coming shortly after that. Christianity really kind of spreading into the East a little bit, but mostly into the Western world. Islam really spreading into the Eastern part of the world, but now Islam is even. I believe we can say there's way more people in the world who call themselves Muslims than Christians today, right? It's the largest religion in the world. So people kind of have an understanding of this. They maybe kind of understand that this is placed with historical significance for Jews. Maybe they're not quite sure why evangelical Christians yet care so much about it. But can we talk a little bit about, Abdullah, can you tell us a little bit about Palestine? How did you learn about the Israel-Palestine conflict? And your religion includes, like I said, is the biggest, includes people from all over the world, including Palestine. So what would you like to add that you feel is important to the history that we've talked about so far?
Well, I think as I was listening and wondering, because When I say something, let's say for instance, there's as Eli mentioned in terms of the word Zionism, there's it means different things to different people. So I want to make sure that I articulate my position and what's Islam's position from the beginning. So as Muslims, whenever we say something, we usually say Bismillah, in the name of God. And as we've stated in the beginning, all of us believe in that one God, one creator. Allah is God in Arabic. Even Christians who happen to speak Arabic in the Arab world refer to God as Allah. So it is very interesting to hear Christians say Inshallah, MashaAllah, Allahu Akbar, and it refer to Allah as the creator. So as a non-Arab, as a person that does not actually speak Arabic, although I can read and understand most of Arabic, my understanding and practice of Islam is based, as I've mentioned in the beginning, on the tradition and the way we follow the tradition is what is stated in our texts. So for us, Islam is, we have to go back and understand what is Islam. Islam linguistically and practically means to submit, not just submit to anyone, but to submit to God's desires and will. And how do we understand God's desire and will? And that is through the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who came as the last prophet in the tradition of prophets that came to humanity. We believe that Islam started not with Prophet Muhammad, but the messenger prophet Adom, the first man that is mentioned in the Genesis, the first of creation from God, or human that was created by God. We believe is the first Muslim or the first creation who believed and practiced what God has dictated or ordained. A Muslim, I want to make sure that definition is there as well. In a linguistic perspective, is a person that submits to the will of God or to Islam. So Islam is submitting to God. A Muslim is a person that submits to Islam. In other words, a Muslim is a person that submits to the will of God. So for us, linguistically speaking, Islam is not with the creation or the birth of Prophet Muhammad, but it was with the Prophet Adam, Noah, and all the other prophets that are mentioned in the Bibles or the different variations of Bibles. We believe in almost every single one of those prophets and messengers that are mentioned in the Bible. Within Sunni Islam, I can't speak for the other traditions. Within our tenets of faith, one of those is that you have to believe in God. You have to believe in the messenger of Prophet Muhammad. You have to believe the fact that there's many messengers and prophets that came throughout history. Now, distinction between Prophet Muhammad and others is that, let's say, for instance, for us, Abraham is our father as well. Abraham is the father of monotheism. However, we also think of him even more dearly. From an Islamic perspective, one of the reasons I got a haircut today is because in a couple of days, I cannot cut hair, beard, nothing from the tradition that we follow. Because for the next 10 days, we're going to be practicing something called the Hijjah, which is a commemoration of Hajj, which is the practice of Abraham and his family. So for us, we hold very dear Abraham and his family. So Islam didn't start with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It got solidified with him. So for us, the tradition of Moses, the tradition of Abraham, the tradition of Jesus, the tradition of all the other biblical prophets that are mentioned, as well as others, for us, those are lessons for us. So one of the things that we are taught from childhood or whenever we enter into Islam, and we do have a lot of conversion. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. Also the most misunderstood religion in the world because we don't read enough. So when we read, we get clarification. At least that's what I like to say. Is we are taught to study the history of Islam. We're taught to study the history of our faith, and that history is mentioned in the Quran or in the tradition. And what is that history? That the Quran gives us stories of Moses, gives us stories of Noah, gives us stories of Jesus, gives us stories of how these godly men and women came down to serve God, or to call people or those tribes and nations to worshiping of God. And the culmination of all that was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. That's one aspect of our faith. The other aspect of it, why is Jerusalem, why is Palestine so important to Muslims? Because oftentimes people don't realize that for Muslims, Palestine, if you don't consider Palestine important to you, you're really not a Muslim. It is not just a humanistic reasoning why we are concerned, because indeed there's a genocide that's happening. Indeed, hundreds and thousands of men and women are being killed. Innocent men and women are being killed. So that is one aspect of it, but that is not what I really want to talk about, although that needs to be condemned. But I want to talk about from the religious perspective. As Muslims, we consider Palestine, or more specifically Jerusalem, one of the most holiest places in Islam. So you have your Mecca, that's where we face towards 5 times a day and pray towards, because that's where the Kaaba is. And for us, Kaaba was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. And but before the Prophet Muhammad told us to pray towards the Kaaba, what we did, early Muslims, is they prayed towards Jerusalem, where the other Qibla or direction of prayer is. And that for us, Jerusalem is extremely important, because we do consider that to be the Holy Lands. This is where prophets and messengers came. Many people that we don't even know who their names were, but they came into that Holy Land. We also believe that the Prophet Muhammad went to Jerusalem while in his early stages of his prophethood, while he was after he received the revelation of prophethood. He went to Jerusalem, and from there he went up and ascended to meet with God. That is a longer conversation and a different conversation. But what's interesting enough is that when he came back to earth, on his way back, he spoke to Moses, right? Another prophet of Islam. So for us, in our understanding of Islam and our practice of Islam, there isn't a distinction between that, Jesus is the prophet of Christians and Moses and Abraham is the prophet of Jews. No, for us, we believe them to be ours as well. It's just that we have a different opinion or interpretation of how we look at their stories and their impact. So for Muslims, Jerusalem, Palestine is quintessential in the sense of it is part of us. It is not something that we can separate from us. It is as if you're separating, as you mentioned, in terms of you've forgotten your arm. Is that as if we are separating our body? That is not possible. So therefore, you have a similar attitude from Muslims who happen to be in Palestine. And for us, many different groups of people, whether it be Zoroastrians, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Jews, have embraced Islam. And for us, it's not even, again, there may be some opinions about this, but for Sunni Islam, it is not your ethnic background that determines whether you're Muslim or not. It is your practice and your statement of what is Islam or what is your faith. So for us, every day that we pray, we talk about Abraham. Every day that we pray, We actually remember Abraham and his family 5 times a day. We actually send peace and salutations, just the way we send peace and salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad. We send upon Abraham and his family. So it is ingrained in our minds and hearts and souls. So the pain and agony that is happening in Palestine is being felt by the Muslim world.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Abdullah. Appreciate that. Um, yeah, thinking about what you were saying, and kind of breaking down that, first of all, that language, that linguistic distinction between how Muslims and Islam, and the connections to the historical traditions of Judaism, the overlap, I suppose, of a lot of these people that we're familiar, that I assume that we probably have a diverse audience, but a lot of people are coming from a Christian background, that people that they might know from the Bible themselves. JR, I want to kick it to you, and I kind of want to wrap a bow on this historical part so we can do the question and answer, because I think people are probably wondering, they understand, okay, you have this history, these ancient civilizations in Southwest Asia. You have historically, culturally, religiously. This is a place, the place that we call Israel or Palestine now, has significance to these two religions. What could that possibly have to do with American Christians? Like why?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So for me, I'm going to kind of do what Eli did. I'm going to start in the now and then work back a little bit. For me, I think there's a really interesting in a really sad way, prejudice against both Judaism and Islam that you see expressed in different ways in a lot of evangelical Christianity. I grew up in a church that did not talk about the end times a lot until I was a high school kid in the youth group. And then we would go to these like weekend retreats where they would, put the timeline of the way the Bible is going to says the world's going to end up on the screen and convince everyone you had to go convert all your friends or else, right? Like that was the whole thing. And this whole way of interpreting the end times, which you've probably heard of because it's the Left Behind books. So they're like insanely huge best-selling Christian books that were like a fictitious future history of how the world's going to end. This is a theological position or a theological theory called dispensationalism. And we're not going to go into all the weeds on it because they're real weedy. But the bottom line for this conversation is that an essential signpost for how we know for sure we're in the end times, a thing that must happen so that the end times can happen, is that the temple will be rebuilt. Now, Abdullah mentioned when Muhammad ascends into heaven, that happens in not just in Jerusalem, but on Mount Zion, like where the temple stood. That's where he ascends, and so that's why Muslims built the Dome of the Rock in that spot to come. I'm right about that, right, Abdullah? That's
there, but it's also Masjid al-Aqsa. The Dome of the Rock is there. That is where the rock was. But for us, that is that's significant, but is not as significant as the whole compound of the less prettier one. That dome that is not as glorified. That is actually more religiously significant than the Golden Dome. The Golden Dome is more of like, it's like, more, that gets more marketed. But religiously speaking, that compound is more important.
But it's all that same spot, right? That same on top of Mount Zion.
Exactly.
So obviously, like for Christians, that has to go in order for the temple to be rebuilt, because it's also sort of non-negotiable where the temple can be. It's not like, and Eli, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't just move the temple to another part of Jerusalem and that's good enough, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Eli, I think you're muted, unless you're just mouthing words at us.
Yeah, I was checking to see if
okay.
you could read my lips. We could talk about it, but there is, there's a couple things here. One is that there is like I said, Judaism is a very legalistic religion. It's like it's all weeds, like you said. It's all weeds, but it's not theological weeds. We have that too, but these like legalistic weeds. And in this sense, the place where the temple was the first time, the second time, and then when it was fixed up afterwards, is considered the holiest place and holy in Jewishness has legal significance. Okay, so not everybody can just go there. A person had to be purified in ritual waters in order to be able to even ascend to the top of that mountain. The reason that there's no Jewish shrine or any sort of presence on top of the mountain is because it's prohibited for most Jews believe it's prohibited to go up there because you don't know exactly where things are and you might walk in the wrong spot by mistake. Some Jews today go up there because they believe that they know where the stuff is. They could do the math or whatever because it says in the Bible how long and how big and how wide and all that. So they're like, it's safe to walk over here, but we don't walk over there. But the only reason they go up there is because they think they know. But we're supposed to stay away from there. So if the Jews are given an option to put it somewhere else, they would say it doesn't work. We have the legal things that apply to the rituals of the temple are not applicable anywhere other than in that spot. Now, if you want to make a temple somewhere else, go ahead. It's called Beth Jacob and it's a synagogue, right? But it's in order to have the rituals of the temple, it needs to be in the place of the temple. In fact, the Torah itself, the Bible prohibits doing those rituals anywhere else.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So again, Christians, dispensationalist Christians know this. And so the Christian Zionist movement, which is the Christians who are super excited to put a temple back on Mount Zion, which is distinct from the Zionism that Eli was talking about in Judaism, though, again, strange bedfellows, right? That you often find these folks hanging out together. The Christian Zionist movement, one, has like no regard for any Muslim people or culture or tradition. It's just in the way. And then two, when it comes to Jews, they only care about Jews insofar as helping the Jewish people furthers their own end times agenda. So again, these are some of the people who are the most rabidly conversionistic, if I can coin that term, right? Like they are the ones that are the most like, if you're not on the right side when Jesus comes back, you go to hell and die forever and ever and ever. And it's our job. Like part of the reason we wrote the Left Behind books is to get as many people believing before it's too late. And yet they don't want the Jews necessarily to convert because we need them to build the temple and do the sacrifices so that Jesus can come back. So again, it's like, we don't really actually care. Like, we don't care what happens to the Jews in the long run. All we care about is them fulfilling their role in our end times pageant so that we get what we want. And then again, we're not really that concerned with what happens to them afterwards. So I think even though superficially a lot of dispensationalist Christian support for Jews looks like support, I think it's actually fairly deeply anti-Semitic because it still ultimately doesn't care about Jews as Jews. And in some ways is as happy to disregard the fate of Jews as they are the fate of Muslims. Again, they don't really care as long as Jesus comes back and we get our eternal reward. So I think it's a deeply selfish theology ultimately, which is part of the reason, even though I was raised in that, I don't follow that brand of end times theology anymore.
What about
just jump in here for 1 second because you mentioned something that made me realize that I should have said something clearer before. Even according to the Zionists of today, the political Zionists, the ones who want to return to Israel, it is not about building a temple. It is a secular state where anybody can live and anybody can be part of, like in any other country. The marriage of Zionism in Christianity and Zionism, even in modern nationalistic Zionism, is even a worse marriage than I thought. because I didn't even really process this because to me Zionism is not any of these things, right? But now that I'm unpacking it because it's become so hot today, I'm realizing that when Israeli nationalists talk about Zionism, they're just talking about living there. It has nothing to do with the temple or rebuilding it. They're almost all completely secular. They don't believe in God even. It's nothing to do with God, nothing to do with religion. There are some religious Zionists who are like in the same camp as those who want to rebuild the temple. They're just like, well, God's going to be on our side and you guys will die, we'll live, haha. But that's not the main thrust of Zionism today, even for the ones who are, I would say, passionately Zionistic in a way that we would maybe find offensive. They still don't want a temple. They don't care about that. They're not religious. They're just want to be the people that are there.
Yeah.
So yes, I would say, anti-Semitic is a harsh word to say that when Christians have, right? But I would say that most Jews that are aware of this, the more liberal Jews, I would say, not religiously, politically, view this as like Christians think we're the useful idiots, and they don't view themselves as allies. The ones who do view themselves as allies is because they're aligned on other conservative principles. So they overlook this like a deeply offensive way of looking at Jews because it's better for them in the long run. But it is not because they're aligned on it. Even those guys are not aligned on it, what it means theologically. Very interesting to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Eli.
Can I
go ahead,
jump in for a moment? For me, it's very, I understand what you said. And Eli, I really appreciate you unpacking the different definitions. For me, it's still, I heard you, I'm hearing you, but it's tough for me to hear the word an atheist Jew or a person like it's tough for me to. I understand. I completely understand what you said. That it's an ethnic, religious, or religious ethnic identity. I get it, but it's tough for me to really digest. So
I hear you 100%. Let me tell you something. More Jews don't believe in God than do.
Again,
just listen to those words. But that is just the truth. It just is the truth. I would say about 10% of Jews are Orthodox. They consider themselves fervently very religious. But every other Jew is either secular or like very moderately religious. It has nothing to do with God. It has to do with tradition and their faith and all that. But it's not based on theological reasons. It's like and to me, it's so natural. And I'm like, wow, this is not interesting at all. But to hear you say it, like the way you look in your eyes, I wanted to say it like as clear as possible. It's actually a very interesting thing that you're pointing out. And yeah, it is different.
Because what's interesting is that here, at least for Islam in America, like 10% of physicians or medical personnel in America are Muslim. Islam has been in America since before the Mayflowers have come in. It's just that we've had different shades throughout the history of America. Typically, the media says Muslims look like this or wear traditional clothes. That's not the case. Muslims come in. JR looks more Muslim than both of us, by the way. But anyway, for us as Muslims, it's very interesting to hear that the American evangelical Christians are hoping for Jesus to come. And in my upbringing and my studies and my understanding, looking from an Islamic perspective completely, not looking at the other side, I'm thinking, hold on a second, there's Orthodox Christians in Jerusalem. The first, the oldest church in Christendom is in Gaza, right? That just got bombed or almost got destroyed. When I hear, from a political perspective, that Muslims are anti-Semites, to me it does. I can't compute. Muslims are Semites, or Islam, people that are in the Middle East are Semites, and for us, I know there is hatred towards injustice and oppression and purely evil. Of course, there should be hate towards that and disgust towards that. However, in terms of the notion of hating someone because of someone's faith, that is not what our religion teaches us. Our religion teaches us to be with those that are oppressed, stand and align with those that are in need. So when you, Eli, when you mentioned initially that after the Holocaust, that the Jews of Europe came into Israel, I have a different opinion there, but that is one side of it. But for us as Muslims, we believe that Muslims came to the aid of Jews even from the time of the Prophet Muhammad, or there was an alignment there. When the second Khalifa of Islam, Umar ibn Khattab, he did not want to pray in a church when Muslims conquered Jerusalem, because he was in fear that Muslims later would make that church into a mosque. That, because he didn't do that, it never got converted, or it never became a mosque. So there's always been, from a historical perspective, a collaboration in terms of standing with those that are in need and standing with those that are being oppressed. However, what is happening now, or especially after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and the way our education system has been, that Muslims don't exist or never existed. Turkey came about all of a sudden. That you've had, almost 1,400 years, or I guess 1,200 years of history of going back and forth, of science and culture and differences of opinions, as well as collaboration. I think we as a society we've completely forgotten that. So I think that's one of the issues that we causes that so much confusion.
Yeah, and I just want to add that I mentioned earlier that Jews living in Europe were extremely persecuted, and they were treated horribly, and they lived very miserable lives, to be honest. Like the stereotype of the grumpy old Jewish guy, it's because of that. Like if you went through that, you'd feel that way too. But the Jews who lived in Arab countries have a very different Judaism. Their Judaism is way more vibrant. It's way more colorful. It's way more flavorful. It's happier. It's so interesting because that's not the stereotypical American Jew, for sure. But the reason I always think is because for most of that time, Jews lived in those countries as full-fledged citizens and did not suffer persecution. They weren't like elite like the Muslim or Arab natives, but they were welcomed in a way that they did not experience in countries in Europe. So when we, like you just said, Abdullah, history did not just start 100 years ago. Right, everyone thinks and Sui said earlier, when someone after World War I, that's when history starts. But the funniest or the ironic thing about that in this conversation is that until 1920, if you ask a Jew, where do you rather live, in a Christian country or a Muslim country, 100% would say a Muslim country. And if you ask a Jew today, 100% would say in a Christian country. And obviously Israel has a lot to do with it, but the way that things change so quickly and we forgot the past, it says something to me. It says a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just add one?
Go ahead.
I think if you ask Muslims are in the Muslim countries, they would probably also say that they want to live in a Christian country, be it the UK, the US, Australia. Especially if you look at most of the Muslims in the Muslim lands, they want to migrate to the West. So I concur with you. But
would they want it to be a Muslim country eventually? That would be the dream, right?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that's a I would love to have a longer conversation with that side of it. But I think because if you look at the Muslim countries, I don't think there's one Muslim country that actually follows the proper Islamic laws. Whether if you mention Iran, if you mention Saudi Arabia, they don't, because Iran has its own philosophy. Saudi Arabia has its own philosophy.
I get what you're saying. You're mixing politics with religion, and then the religion gets corrupted. This is the exact reason why you see some Orthodox Jews protesting against the state of Israel, because they believe that Judaism is Jewish, religious, not secular, not political, and they are upset that the Jewish state was created. So it goes, I see it going, the same way you're saying it. I said, we have those guys too. And that's why they don't like Israel, for that exact reason. And although you'll see some protesters that are, very visible, that they're saying, they're anti-Israel, that look very Orthodox. A lot of Orthodox Jews who are not visible, they don't either care one way or the other. And if you ask them, do you want an Israeli state? They'd be like, whatever, because of this exact reason, that they don't want the religion to become diluted by the nationalism and the political part of it. So yeah. I'm very fascinated that you agree with that, and the same thing that comes up in Islam.
Yeah, I think that that's really, something that's come up quite a bit, is that you have the religious and then you have the political as two separate things that sometimes go together, but then that you can't necessarily extricate them from each other either. And so we do have, would it be all right if we go ahead and move to part 2, question and answer? Because we're getting a question. Okay. So I'm going to throw this to you, Abdullah. We have Marilyn here, and she says in the chat, I think we can agree that many Christians in America don't fully understand the history. So how can we be more supportive and more sensitive? How can Christians be more supportive and more sensitive? Abdullah?
That's a very good question. I appreciate that. I'm going to try my best to answer that question and with my own opinion. So please excuse me if someone has a different opinion in the audience. I think one of the best ways to do that is just to get to know your neighbors and have open dialogue with individuals. I appreciate disagreeing with people. I appreciate with having discussion, and at the end of the discussion, I don't need you to agree with me one bit, and I am okay with you being okay with not agreeing with any word I've said. But at least I want to have an open dialogue. And if you're going to dislike me for who I am, not who you think I am. So for that to happen, I think more Christians should open up their churches and homes and businesses and other ways of the people that perhaps are Muslim or Jews or of a different faith, to have that dialogue. And I would say the same thing to Muslims and Jews and others, to have that open dialogue, and that to me will foster a more unity of trying to make the world a better place. Not that you and I are going to all agree and that you and I are going to all be in a uniform line. And that's not what I'm advocating for. And I don't think that should be the case. I think we should have our differences. We should have our own opinions. But we need to get to know each other. And the way to do that is through conversations.
Yeah. Thank you, Abdullah. Yeah. That dialogue, that getting to know your neighbor, that making space. I think that Christian evangelicals in America really need to think about what they want the outcome of their conversations to be. Do you want the outcome to be that you're right in the end, or do you want the outcome to be understanding? Do you want your outcome to be that you're learning more, not just ending being right? Eli, I want to kick this question to you now. How can Christians in America be more supportive and more sensitive?
Tough question. The first thing I would say is exactly what Abdullah said, is to, open your eyes, open your doors, open your homes, because I would say, I don't know, in all urban and suburban areas in America, not the rural areas, but in all urban and suburban areas, there is at least a Jewish population. Like, it doesn't mean that there's a lot of Jews. There's not a lot of Jews anywhere, except for maybe New York, Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago. But like all the other places in America that are cities, like real cities, I've been to a lot of places. We drove cross country 3 different times. You go to Charleston, South Carolina, there's several synagogues and there's a Jewish community. You go to Savannah, Georgia, there's several or synagogues and a Jewish community. You go all the way across 80, you'll find Jewish communities all across the fruited plain, right? They exist. They're small, but they exist. And I think that Abdullah is right that there's not enough intercommunication just for the sake of friendship. A lot of people's social lives revolve around their church, which by mistake almost excludes everybody who doesn't go to church. Like, I'm not allowed to go to a church event by my religion. So like, you just basically said you're not welcome. Now, maybe some people will go anyway, but I'm just saying, like, you're not being friendly by saying come to our church event, right? That it sounds friendly, but you have to kind of separate the religious social life that exists with your human social life, which is hard because I think that so much of evangelical Christianity for sure revolves around church functions, and at least from what I see on TV and from the people I know. Could be I'm wrong in lots of places, it's not like that, but it gives me, I get that impression that there's like a built-in social environment that through the church, and if you're not part of it, you don't even know what you're but not part of. So I feel like that.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to talk also a little bit about, and I'm going to kick this to you, Abdullah. So many in the West, especially among policymakers in the United States, label Hamas as a terrorist group. Since 9/11, Islam has to contend with continual conflation of Islam with extremist factions. So how do you engage groups like Hamas as a Muslim?
That's a very non-religious question. So I just have to address that first because I haven't, although I've studied politics, although I've been in, I've studied this, but it's been almost 20 years since I've went into these details. I don't know the answer, honestly. I don't know the answer on how to really address this. But I would say this, which is just because someone or some institution labels a group or a particular group a certain way, I don't always buy it. I'm not talking about just Hamas or any other group. Let's say, for instance, Nelson Mandela, Dr. Martin Luther King, these individuals, even Rosa Parks, were not favorites of the American society while they were still alive or during the act that got them to be famous. Until recently, I believe in 1996 or 1998, Nelson Mandela was considered a threat according to the U.S. government. So when it comes to certain political or ideological groups, I think it's very misleading, especially when it comes to the involvement of media and various different interest groups that are involved. Because if you look at, I don't want to really talk about Hamas per se, because for me to talk about it, it gets into for or against. That's because I don't want to talk about it from that perspective. I want to just go back a little bit, as you mentioned, 9/11. Osama bin Laden was funded by the U.S. government. It is not my opinion. This is a fact, especially because we wanted to beat the Russians during Cold War when the U.S. had interest in Afghanistan, and we wanted to make sure that the Muslims or the Taliban of Afghanistan were going to be able to defend the Russian or defend against the Russians from coming in. So therefore, the Taliban was in the White House. Therefore, the Mujahideen that were trained under Osama bin Laden were trained by U.S. military or U.S. intelligence forces. But after them making a different decision, after them taking a different position, they became a threat to our country. And I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I'm not saying they did this or that right. What I'm saying is there is a bigger story to the whole situation. And in terms of what is happening in Palestine today, in Israel today, I think the full picture is not completely shared, especially in the Western media. Number one. Number two is that innocent children and women are dying, and that is the extent of it, and it needs to be stopped. I think our political leaders and our media elites have an agenda that they get benefit from, and it's unfortunately it has a lot to do with oil. It has a lot to deal with weapons. So for me, it's out of my wheelhouse, but I also have that personal opinion that this is what it is, and that's why it gets into that political situation. But if you come back and ask me from the religious side of it, I have a religious answer, which is that these people are innocent and they're being killed, not because they're Muslim, but because they're there and consider themselves to be Palestinian, because many Christian Palestinians have been killed. So I don't think it is because Hamas has done this or that. If that was the case, then the 75 years of occupation in certain parts of the land would not have taken place.
Thank you, Abdullah. I think it's important for our audience to really put themselves, and I have a question for Eli next, to really put themselves in the shoes of those folks who are on the ground in this conflict right now, and really think about what would motivate you to fight with this amount of fervor. Think about what's important to you in your life and what you care about, and that it's feeling threatened. So I think that helps kind of give some context for why this conflict is so messy and difficult. But before I said it's a story about underdogs. I mean, people really feel like, and quite literally so, that their whole way of life and their everything they care about in their lives are being utterly destroyed by somebody else. So they have no choice but to fight back. And I know I want to ask Eli, and then JR, you can jump in. I want to ask Eli this question, and then I know we have a question in the chat too. And Eli, before this current war, again, still talking about politics and response, anti-Semitism had been on the rise in the United States. In the last 6 months, we've seen charges of anti-Semitism leveled against pro-Palestinian protesters. What's it like for Orthodox Jews right now?
Okay, good question. There's a lot to say on this. The first thing I'm going to say is this is universal. Universal thing is, before it was mentioned, anti-Semitism, like I'm a Semite, who's a Semite. The word anti-Semitism today just means bigotry against Jews. That's what it means. You could parse the words into whatever you want, but anti-Semitism is defined as hatred, bigotry against Jews. What is bigotry? Bigotry against anybody. So I have a very easy way of figuring out if you're a bigot or not, okay? Mm-hmm. If you think something about one guy because of something you know about a different guy, you're a bigot. It's that simple. There's nothing about what you know about those guys that has anything to do with these guys unless they are the same guy. And if you think they're the same guy, that's your blindness. That's your bigotry, right? So if a white person says, well, I don't want to do this because there's black people there, bigotry. Why? He'll say, no, because I saw that black guy somewhere else did something really bad. I don't want to go there. There's going to be other black guys there. Well, then you're a bigot, because what does that guy have to do with those guys, right? And this is the problem with anti-Muslim hatred in America as well. Yes, there was 12 guys that did 9/11. There's a lot of damage from 12 guys, right? But those 12 guys have nothing to do with any other guys unless those guys are like, yeah, I was part of it too. So you can't have any opinion about one from one about the other based on anybody else. That is just the definition of bigotry, and that's how it works, and that's how it works in every single case. And there's no difference between the way a bigot behaves when it's a bigot towards Jews or Muslims or to religious people or to atheist people or to colored people or to immigrants or to whoever. That is just what bigotry is, always. So that's the thing I wanted to say about, anti-Semitism. It's just following the straight line of bigotry. Now, I'm going to quote a famous philosopher, Taylor Swift. You wouldn't last an hour in the asylum I was raised in. Okay? Jews have been persecuted forever. We're comfortable here. This is the way we expect it to be. When I grew up, I was told everybody was an anti-Semite. It's Jerry Seinfeld has in Seinfeld, Uncle Leo, he orders a burger and it gets overdone. And he's like, this cook is an anti-Semite. And Jerry's like, he just overcooked the burger. Like, why do you? He's like, you don't just overcook a burger, Jerry. Because in the 80s and the 90s, it was the end times of when Jews felt that everybody, literally everybody, hated us. What's crazy to me is that in the early 2000s, I did something really stupid. Actually, in the late 2000s. You could probably even find it online now. I wrote an article that said there's no such thing as anti-Semitism anymore. Because in 2000s, it did not feel like there was, I never experienced anti-Semitism in my life until recently. So we live in a time, for people my age, certainly, we live in a time where we're like weird that we think that there's not going to be anti-Semitism everywhere. But if you ask my grandparents, they're like, of course they hate us. Everybody hates us. That's the way it always was. That's the way it always will be. And if you think otherwise, you're being naive and stupid. That's how I was taught. And then I'm like, no, you're being naive and stupid. Because look, all these people that I'm friends with that are obviously not Jew haters, and you said they were, right? Mm-hmm. So I did the stupid thing of writing that article, and I defended it, and I believed it was true. And right now, I'm embarrassed of it. I'm ashamed of it because I was proven wrong. Anti-Semitism made a comeback. And like I said, no Jews are like, wow, this is weird. We're used to it. I once was at an interfaith, I guess it was a summit, Jews and Muslim leaders in Los Angeles. There was like an Egyptian contingent that came. And the Muslims said they wanted to learn from Jews how to be a minority in a country. Because Muslims are used to living in countries where they're the majority. And it's like a weird thing to come somewhere where the main religion is not yours. You're looked at as like a weird person. You're looked at with like side eye. Like that's not the way that Muslims are used to living for the last 2,000 years. We are used to that. Like I said, you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me. That's where we live. So no one's like, I can't believe there's anti-Semitism out there. We're like, of course there is. We've been waiting for this. Where you been all this time? That being said, the same principle applies to this particular conflict as it does to any other case in the world. Just because you know what one Jewish person has done in one place in the world, one time or many times, it gives you zero information about the Jew that you see in front of you today. So that's why, like, the oldest Jewish bigotry is the Jews killed Jesus, so now we hate the Jews today. That's like me saying, I hate a German living in Germany today because of what their great-grandparents did to my grandparents. That's bigotry. That's not fair. That's bigotry. So Jews have been the victims of this forever because specifically Jews have been a minority everywhere we've gone. Right? Everywhere. Israel is the first time that we have not been a minority in 2,000 years. So everywhere we go, the majority is like, those guys are the weirdos. So, and they're like, yeah, you know what this Jew did here and this Jew did there? Like, but they have nothing to do with each other. Like, I literally don't even know this person exists, and we have not had any of the same experiences. And even if we did have the same experiences, their choices don't reflect on me. Mm-hmm. So I want to speak to this because right now, this has become very, very, very problematic and common for people to say that every Jewish person who, first of all, believes in the state of Israel or who is in favor of Jews living in Israel is something bad because of something you saw about other people that are in favor of Israel, that live in Israel, that they've done. By the way, like Abdullah said, and like Sue said, without all the context. That's bigotry. And it's happening a lot now, right? I mean, I have not seen it like this in my life, like I said. I'm sure that you ask, people that are 70, 75 years old, they're like, yeah, that's what it was like when I was a kid. But right now, for people my generation, I'm 42, it's a shock to see, people dropping out of like social groups, leaving Facebook groups. I'm not even on there, but if I was, I would tell you the examples that I have. But like, or comments in social media, or even, I don't know, just like casual anti-Semitism that's everywhere now. It spreads. It's a virus. It's as soon as it's acceptable for 1 second, it becomes like prolific. It's crazy. And I'm still like, I'm shaking. I'm surprised about it. It shakes me up still. Like I don't even really believe it sometimes, but I'm telling you it's there. And Jews, Orthodox Jews who are visibly Jewish, not, every Jew that lives in this world, most do not look Jewish. There's no such thing as looking like a Jew, because a Jew can look like they're from anywhere. But the ones who wear ritual clothing, wear a head covering, or wear funny clothes that look like they're from, from like 1850 Europe, those guys are visible, okay? And they're being persecuted. They're being blamed. They're being hated. They're being told things that are horrible in a way that has not been acceptable in American society for a long time.
I just want to say, Eli, real quickly, that Abdullah has stepped away to do his evening prayers because it's sunset. So I just wanted to explain that he'll be back. And Eli, you're talking about the anti-Semitism that has become so common, and how casual people are about it, and how problematic that is. And I wonder, JR, if you could just speak very quickly. So how do Christians respond to this?
Oh gosh. I mean, one, I think if we would even just start believing our Jewish and Muslim friends who are suffering right now, that would go a long way. And again, I hope we have been practicing this since the Me Too movement, since Black Lives Matter, since all of that, practicing believing people who are marginal, who are suffering, because the reality is, like, the higher up on the pyramid you are, the less of it you see. And Christians are the majority in this country.
But now it's become fashionable for the people at the top to say that they're being persecuted because they're not at the bottom.
Right. Yes. And it's, again, I think, I will say one of my favorite things that Jesus says is, I am the truth. And we, in theory, really prize truth telling in our religion. And I think we need to be more earnest about that, like be earnest about pursuing truth telling. When it comes to Israel Palestine, like, believe it or not, because this conflict is 75 years old, a lot of people are already working on it. People who live in Israel and Palestine, Jews and Muslims and Christians who have come together and are, again, you're not going to believe this, but we're like not the first interfaith dialogue about this subject, right? Like it's happened a lot. And so part of it is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're gonna even highlight a couple of places you can donate at the end of this if you want. So I think part of it is that if this is something for Christians, this particular conflict is something that is not affecting us as directly. Though, as Abdullah pointed out, there are a lot of Christians in Palestine who have been there. Like, Bethlehem is in Palestine, like the spot where Jesus was born. And there's a church there that was built there in like 200 before I like to say before Christianity was cool, right? Before Constantine made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. So like that's one of the ways it's legit, was back when it was still illegal to put a church there. They put a church there. So that's like pretty good indication that it's a spot that likely was very close to where Jesus was actually born. Like that spot, that church that has been a church for 2,000 years, marking the spot where Jesus was likely born, like is in Palestine. So there are Christians in Palestine, and there are Christians who are being affected by this. But I think at least the way we tend to frame it here in America is that this is like a Jew and Muslim problem, and we are just sort of, on the sidelines. And I think the religious impulse that Jesus calls us to is saying, if my neighbor's suffering, then I'm suffering. And so I think at minimum, one of the things we ought to be doing is extending some empathy towards our Jewish and Muslim friends who are suffering, believing them. And then, I mean, some of the real basic stuff, like if you see something, say something, right? Don't put the burden on our Jewish and our Muslim friends to defend their own dignity. They do, and y'all do a wonderful job of that. I'm sorry that you have to, right? But if someone says something anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim, I should say something, right? I should stand up and say, hey, that's not okay. Even though I'm not affected by that, because my friends, my neighbors are affected by it. And so it should affect me. So I think educating ourselves is a super important step. There are so many great articles and books and podcasts and everything. No matter what your learning style is, there are ways that you can learn about the history and the current state of the conflict. I think both Eli and Abdullah mentioned extending friendship to Jews and Muslims. Going out of your way to just meet some folks. Eli, here, I'll ask you both this. Eli, if I wanted to come to a synagogue some Saturday, is that allowed? Is that something that, do y'all do drop-ins, or what's the protocol if a Christian was like, hey, I want to try to,
I would say you're going to the wrong event.
Okay.
Go to a Friday night Shabbat dinner. That's where you'll see Jews living Judaism. I mean, synagogue, okay. It's like it's business. You got to pray, but it's not like church, which is the social network. It's more like, this is where we do our business. And then the real religion, the real taste, the real place to feel that religion is in a home on Friday night for a Shabbat dinner.
Okay.
So no, you can't just drop in. You need to be invited, but you'll get invited if you want to be invited. There's always there's people that will invite you everywhere.
That's good to know. Abdullah, same question. Like, do you show up for a Friday prayer at a mosque, or what's the best way, if you don't know, say if I don't know that I have some Muslim neighbors or something like that, what is a good way to build some connections?
So for us, you can show up to Friday prayer, no problem. You just have to listen and come in and listen to the lecture. And we're there 5 times a day, so you can come at any of those times. However, depending on which community you go to, depending on what the opinion is, depending on if there was enough traffic issues or how the weather is, depending, who you're speaking to, you're going to get different reactions. But I think for majority of Muslim American mosques, they're open to the general public. They're open to having non-Muslims come in and learn about Islam. So you can show up any Friday, no problem. But you want to come in and have respect as well. But there are also fears, unfortunately, due to ignorant individuals that have committed crimes and have done unmentionable and unspeakable acts of violence within the Muslim community as well. So so you wanna come in with humility as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. Sorry, Eli, go ahead.
Yeah, I got carried away. I meant to say something earlier, so I want to go back to something, and it comes back to this point as well. Okay, like you're talking about what can Christians do, and you asked me this. Even you sent me a nice WhatsApp message way back. In I guess like October, November, and really the thing that's I think most difficult, anti-Semitic incidents are up, right? But those are like one-offs. Like a person gets an anti-Semitic incident, another person gets an anti-Semitic incident. It's like, it's cumulative, but it's not, you don't feel that always. Here's what you feel always. What you feel always is, I was the guy in, like I said, 2008 or whatever, that there's no such thing as anti-Semitism, because I had all these friends that I thought were my friends. And then to hear them say certain things that I never thought I'd hear them say, or to just not say things that I would expect them to say or hope they would say, it's very it's very alienating. It's very lonely. It hurts. We feel betrayed because we thought we were part of the cool guys who don't get persecuted. We thought we were friends with those people, and now they turned against us. Now, this is very general, obviously. It's not specific to one person, but to the Jew who was like always like anti-Semitism everywhere and like I'm only going to talk to Jews, that guy, he's fine. But to the people like me who really believed in a better world, who didn't believe in that world, and who had friends and experiences, they just feel so invalidated and like they've been spit on. It hurts. And it feels very, like I said, very lonely. And so the anti-Semitism, those incidents, it's bad and all that. But I think there's something bigger than that, which is feeling alienated, feeling alone, feeling isolated in a world where you thought you were part of something. Now that thing has left you behind or pushed you away or shunned you. I don't think a lot of people that aren't in my position are aware of this or know about this. It's so, you feel like you woke up in an upside down world. All the things that you thought about people that you thought that you knew, that thought that they knew you, it's not there. It's gone. And what do you have left? It's crumbled. Like, unless they do something to make it fixed or make it better, it's gone forever. So like, it just feels like lost time, lost effort, like waste. Like, it's just a shame that it all happened. Like, it doesn't, I can't even express it in a way that makes it sound as bad as it feels. To just like, I can give you an analogy. You know, in Inside Out, when Riley's islands start collapsing, she has Friendship Island and Family Island. One of our islands was, you know, feeling safe, feeling loved, feeling accepted, and that's gone. Whatever comes afterwards is something else. That is gone. It will never be repaired. And that is scary, and it hurts and makes me try to say it out loud.
Thank you for sharing that, Eli. Yeah. So, you know, this conversation, I think that people in our audience can sense that pain and can kind of feel that with you. A couple of things that I would like for us to do before we close out. I know we had another question in the chat that we'd probably like to address, and also we need to point out some places where we can donate money. So, JR, what order would you like to do that in?
Why don't we do this? Why don't I talk about the donation links real quick?
Okay.
And then Jeremy's question, which I love, but it's a big one. I'm not surprised, Jeremy. So why don't, if it's okay, I'd love to do the donation links, and then maybe we can all kind of offer a kind of a final thought and formally close, and then we can do maybe a little bit of a, if people need to log off, that's fine, and then we can do a little post-show Q&A, have Jeremy, lounge about and discuss Jeremy's question about empire and religion, because it's just little stuff. So in the descriptors for the video, both on Facebook and on YouTube, there are several donation links. So I'm just going to go through them real quick, so you know what they are. First of all, if you want to donate to either Abdullah's masjid, which is, I learned this, Abdullah. I didn't know that. I was like, what's the difference between a masjid and a mosque? Mosque is just how white people say it. Is that safe to say?
Mosque is in English. Masjid is in Arabic.
Okay, yeah. So, So if you want to donate to the mosque to support the what they do there, you do that. If you want to donate to the Haven Collective, we put a link there for. We're actually going to host another one of these conversations later in June about a different topic. But if you want to help support what we do here, you can do that. And then we have a couple of charities. I'm going to talk about the one that I put in there, and then I want to have Eli talk about his, because I think it's really great. So I just put in Doctors Without Borders, mainly because they've been in in Palestine, helping people who don't have access to healthcare since long before this conflict started. And I always love to support organizations that have already been on the ground doing the work. I think that's really good. And again, I think Doctors Without Borders is great. I think, as usual, though, Eli had an even better suggestion than I did. So, Eli, will you tell us a little bit about the charity that is the other link in the description?
Sure. So, Israel, there's a lot of there's violence, right? There's a war. All that's bad. There is some good stuff happening there. One of the good things that's happening there is it's an organization called Magen Adom, which means the Red Jewish Star, or the Red David Star, because it's like the Red Cross, but like for Jews. But it's different than the Red Cross because it's an organization that specifically goes out of its way to have Muslims, Arabs, Christians, Jews, Israelis, religious, not religious, all of them are employed by this organization as EMTs. There's frequently, photos that go around on like WhatsApp groups where you see, a Muslim on his rug praying while a Jewish man is standing doing his prayer right next to each other, because it's like the time is sunset is there, like they just got to get it done, and they're just in the same place doing it, and they are working together to bring relief to people who need help in emergencies. And when there's an attack or when there's any sort of disaster in the borders within Israel, they're the first responders. They have a blood bank, and everybody gets blood from there. Not for Jews, not for Israelis. It's for everybody. It's a vision of what could be. And not only what could be, what is. It exists. Every person in Israel that is a citizen prefers that over violence. And that's how, except for the crazies, right? Of course, there are some crazy people out there, but like the citizens of Israel, the people that live there, that's what they think Israel is. To them, Israel's Magen David Adom. It's this beautiful organization of every type of person working together to help others of every type of person. And it exists and it works. They've been doing it for years. They've saved lives. They continue to save lives, and they need money. So if you can help them, you'd be helping the whole region.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to go first on final thoughts, mainly because I don't have a ton to add to everything you guys have shared. I just want to say it's been really incredible to get to sit with the two of you. And to Abdullah's point, maybe we can do this again, every so often. There's plenty for us to talk about. Again, I really respect both of you. I really value your friendship, and it's been an honor to just be in dialogue with you about something so important. So again, I don't have any other like final thoughts to add. I was mainly here to kind of hear the two of you. So Eli, do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you wanted to say that we didn't cover or anything like that?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. First, I have to thank you for arranging this, Sue, for mediating and doing a great job of incorporating everybody into the conversation. And it's actually been a lot better than other events and dialogues that I've engaged with. So, good job. And thank you for including me. My final thought, though, is that I am actually uncomfortable that this conversation happened. And I'll tell you why. I am not Israeli. Abdullah is not Palestinian. Yes, I love people that live in both places. And yes, he loves people that live in both places, but I am not responsible for them. And Abdullah is not responsible for them. And the fact that I'm not saying this is what it is. It's not tokenized. It's not you're like, oh, the one Jew I know and the one Arab Muslim. No, I'm not saying that that's what it is. But I'm just saying that our first thought should not be that the people that are similar in some ways to those people there are responsible or are a part of it. In my heart, I'm part of it. I have people that I love that live there and that I care about. But that's me. That's my things that I care about. That's not what you care about. So I think we could do a lot more by having the conversation than by not having the conversation. But it feels like it shouldn't have to be this way. I guess I'm still a little utopian like that.
Yeah. Thank you, Eli. Yeah, a good challenge for us too. Something to remember. Abdullah, what are your final thoughts? Is there anything that we didn't mention that you'd like to bring up?
Well, I'm going to echo what Eli said. I'm extremely uncomfortable. This is not. I usually don't like being in these sort of conversations at all. I don't. Although I've studied religion, I've studied religion in a Catholic university, Jesuit university, even to be more specific, but I still don't like getting into these conversations. But I thought that this would be a wonderful opportunity to address some of the viewpoints and some of the beliefs that Muslims have, not to speak on behalf of what is happening in Palestine or what is happening in Israel, but just to speak on behalf of the Muslim American communities that are here. So for my final thoughts, it was very uncomfortable, but I tried to address my personal opinions, and I do want to thank you, JR and Sue, for putting this together, although it was uncomfortable. And I do want to say that this is a wonderful opportunity to have further discussion, because there's so much that can be said, and there's so much elaboration that needs to be had because of whatever issue or whatever point that we make. It needs to be understood from the perspective that I'm speaking from, or you're speaking from, or if there's a third or fourth perspective. One last opinion that I want to make, or issue that I want to say before I conclude, is that for us Muslims here that's living in the West, not just in America, we are in a very unique situation, which is that if, at least for me, that was a person that was born in another country, but my children were born here, and I expect to die here. I expect my children's children to be here. So therefore, we are Americans. However, it is not always. We are not always considered as Americans for at least in the grand scheme of things. So for us, we sometimes have to deal with double or maybe triple sort of bigotry and prejudice. One is the Islamophobic prejudice that we are facing on a regular basis, but also the xenophobic and perhaps even in terms of the colorism that is within the wonderful, I'm being very facetious here, racist rainbow that we have in our country. So for us, I've always grown up knowing and appreciating being the underdog. However, that underdog that I've been, I've always had this notion in my mind and my heart, which is that God is on my side. But what I've always questioned myself on, and that is, am I on God's side? Am I with God? I know God is with me, but am I with God? Am I doing what I need to do? So for my final thought, which is that we as Muslims are supposed to serve humanity. We are supposed to serve the creation of the Creator. And I look forward to furthering that conversation. I look forward to being able to serve many of you if you come and learn more about us. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to share that last message and thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Eli and Abdullah, thank you so much. I mean, you gave us two full hours and then some. I mean, who has 2 hours in the middle of the week anymore? There's so many other things you could be doing. And so we're so appreciative that you've spent that time with us. And I know I've enjoyed your company and getting to know you both. And I know that JR appreciates y'all. I want to encourage everybody to check out those links for donations. Eli, where can people keep up with you?
You're going to have to find me on JR's podcast.
Okay. All right.
I used to be very involved online. I retired.
Okay.
You know, I really am very private person now. But if somebody would like to be in touch with me, they can go through JR. He has my contact.
Okay. All right. And Abdullah, is there any place that people can follow you? Or you prefer not?
No, if you look up my name the way it is, you'll find me online. However, I am slowly, because as I'm getting older, I am slowly taking on Eli's position as well.
It's the most ironic for me. I was originally the first Orthodox rabbi online. I had thousands of people on in my community. I was the guy. Like I was that, and now, not even a little.
That's fine. I respect that. That's totally fine too. And I hope you guys see the comments here. I know Chanel said beautiful conversation tonight. Marilyn said we appreciate you sharing your perspectives, appreciate your vulnerability and your thoughts and beliefs. So I hope everybody has a good evening, and make sure that you listen to this message and take some time to reach out to your neighbors and to do some more research on your own and some studying. And at Haven Collective, you're always welcome to reach out to JR if you need anything else. So stick around for our post show. But otherwise, good night.
All right. Let's Josh, can we throw Jeremy's question up there? This was a fun one. All right. What is each religion's relationship to empire, specifically when we think about America and democracy? What does our religion say should be our religion's goal relative to the nation? And does your personal belief maybe differ from that? Eli, how about you? Jews have some thoughts about empires, right?
This is such a Christian question, not in a bad way. Like this would never, like I'm a Jew. I have a million questions. I answer questions with questions. I would never think about this because it's so foreign to like we have never had this mentality ever. So the answer, like the easy answer to this question is literally no thoughts. No thoughts. But when you ask a question and you like make me think about it, I could give you some thoughts, but like it's not a thing that I think about. Right? You know, they say, how often does the average male think about the Holy Roman Empire? Right. Never. Never.
I don't believe that.
I'm telling you, we just think about like the holy, my little space over here empire. That's it. But yeah, so Jewish philosophy, Jewish tradition definitely has like this vision for the future of a messianic time where, you know, everybody would be serving the one God, and we would, instead of being on the bottom, we'd be maybe on the top for a little while, you know, just give us a turn. But, you know, it's very vague. It's very theoretical. It's very for not now, for like after the after times. And then now the Jews are like, just get me through the day, get me through the week, have a place where I can like feel like I can practice my religion safely, be open about my Judaism. The only empire that's, you know, the only domain that we are trying to master is our own. And I know that other religions see it very differently. So I'm curious to hear from Abdullah. I mean, at least Christianity, I know in America, they views this as like, you know, the promised land in certain ways. It's just like, for me to remember that people think that is hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Abdullah, what about you? What for Islam, what is the kind of the attitude towards nationhood? Or, you know, you mentioned you can't point to one Muslim country today that practices Islam correctly. So like, yeah, what do you do with that as a Muslim?
So this question reminds me of in 1977, I think, or 70 something article that Samuel Huntington wrote, Clash of Civilizations, especially when Islam became the new civilization that needed to be fought by the West. Because prior to Islam, it was the Soviets, and before that, you know, you have different clash that you needed to have. That's great, but as we look at from a nation to the individual, at the end of the day, Islam is both a nationalistic ideology per se, because you can make Islam what it is depending on where you are in the world. So in India, which is the largest democracy in the world, you have more Muslims in India than you have in Pakistan. You have more Muslims in India than you have in Bangladesh. We consider Saudi Arabia the holiest country, I guess. No, sorry. Let me take that back. Let me take that back. The holiest city in Islam is Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia. So for Muslims around the world, Saudi Arabia has a very special position in their hearts. However, the largest population of Muslims are in Indonesia. So this concept of Muslim and Islam taking over the world, it had its place, but that was when this nation statehood concept and ideology that came about, it became different after World War II. It completely changed, especially if you look at what Gamal Abdel Nasser from Egypt focused on, which was Pan-Arabism, Pan-Africanism, and then the whole Islamic or Muslim statehood. But that shifted because the concepts have been evolving, especially after post-colonial powers have been involved in the Muslim world. Because prior to World War I, you had Muslims that were under the Ottoman Empire. But after World War I, after World War II, Ottoman Empire had no real impact, and you have all these smaller institutions or nations and states started to come up, and then you had fights within them. So from a political perspective, you have people trying to unite because of a religious identity. But in reality, it has nothing to do with religion, has everything to do with their geopolitical circumstance and situation. So that you have that side of it. But from a religious perspective, when we believe Jesus is going to come back, when we believe that that world will be united and worshiping God alone, we believe in that as well. So, but for that, we Muslims don't actively go out and try to make sure that that happens. What we focus on is that when the Antichrist comes, we want to make sure that we are actually ready to be able to address the Antichrist. How? By making sure that we are firm and steadfast within our own religion and understanding of the religion and practice of the religion. So for Muslims, you have especially American Muslims, it's a very unique situation, because in America, in our community in Sachse, Texas, I'll talk about our mosque for a moment. Typically, if you go, one of the opportunities that I have with my day job at Bayan Islamic Graduate School is that I've had the opportunity to travel all across the country in the United States. I've been the way Muslims, our religious day or our day of service is on Friday, and the sermon, we call it a khutbah. So I've given khutbah in 40 different states across the country. So I've had an opportunity to speak to different people all across the country. And when I speak to these different Muslims, they come in different shades and colors. They come from different backgrounds. They come from different ideologies as well. And what is unique is that, especially in Sachse, is that we have a diverse group of people, especially ethnic and religious understanding of group of people, meaning within this Islamic perspective. And what I find very interesting is that question that has been asked about empire, that is no longer a real issue for Muslims in America right now. What is the issue for Muslims in America? Perhaps this is the case for Jews and Christians as well, which is, how do we take our understanding of Islam? How do we take our understanding of faith and convey it to the next generation? how can they also practice what we believe in? Because what is happening for the average American Muslim or Muslim American is that they are not sure if their children will practice Islam the same way as they practice Islam. I'm not sure if perhaps my children will, but I'm not sure if my children's children will practice Islam the same way I practice it. Meaning not in the sense of fulfilling the rituals, but fulfilling the principles behind it. One of the fundamental principles is it goes across, which is making sure that you take care of your neighbors, making sure that your character, your dealings, your the way you interact with people is done with good character, or being beautiful, or being caring. That is the essence of Islam. Whereas that is not what the media portrays. That is not what you get on an average. When you ask an average person, they wouldn't think that's what Islam is. The reason why you submit to God is so that you can serve the creation of God. So for us, the empire is there when Jesus comes, or the empire is there when we perhaps have to deal with it on a very larger political situation, where perhaps if you look at Bangladesh, Pakistan, because the reason I mentioned those two specific countries is because the creation of Pakistan before 1971 and 1948 was because of the purpose of Israel and Pakistan are the only two nations in the world that was created with religion in mind, and that was that, and then I guess India as well. But it was so that Islam can be the dominant religion in those countries. However, if you look at those two nations now, they are secular, right? They're 100% secular, and Islam is just. We don't call it an Islamic country. We call it a Muslim country, meaning the country is not ruled with the rules and regulations of Islam. The country is ruled by Muslims and the rules that the society has built. I hope that it gets to
that's fascinating.
Talking about.
We always hear in America, I mean, not to open a can of worms, but like in America for 20 years, like we've been hearing about ISIS and the caliphate. And I know that it's a minority, and I know that it's the fundamentalists, but I would say if you would ask an American what Muslims believe about empire, they would probably say that's the goal, to conquer the world, like to play Risk, and it's probably not even close to 1%. Like it's a very small percentage of Muslims that have that dream and that yearning. But, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So that's what we hear about. But it's, I'm not saying I'm surprised by what you said. I'm saying it does not sound consistent with what I would have said, just going off of what I've seen and heard from the world I live in.
So I want to counter, and absolutely I agree. I agree with what you just said. But I want to counter the thought. There's almost 2 billion Muslims in the world. We're doing a very bad job in conquering the world.
I used to say this. So when I was, I was the guy that was defending Islam when people would say, the Islamophobic things they were saying, in the 2000s. And I would say, they're like, don't you know what they want to do? I'm like, listen, if Muslims want to conquer the world, it would be over already. They would have done it already. They can do it. There's enough people. They have the means to do it. The fact that they didn't do it tells you that that's not what they're trying to do. So that was my exact argument all those years ago. And I fully agree. If everybody thought like ISIS, then ISIS would have been very successful.
There's opinions that ISIS is not built within. It goes the same way, the way we believe. Whether it be the Mujahideen of Afghanistan, or the Taliban of Afghanistan, ISIS of Iraq and Syria were also built by outsiders instead of the people of the land. Because
Also true. Of course, there's background to all stories, but like the people doing the work, they were the ones, right? The ones you saw representing the movement were those.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about Christians and empire, because fortunately, there's no examples in history of a Christian nation corrupting Christianity or diluting it in any way. It's always just worked out super well. Yeah,
those crusades were good too.
So good, right? Yeah, no notes, 10 out of 10. So yeah, I mean, like we've just been joking, right? But obviously, I think the exact same critique that Abdullah you leveled against making Islam a state religion go to Christianity. When Christianity was absolutely flourishing, traced right up until Constantine. And then as soon as Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, we immediately start seeing that's when we see the rolling back of female clergy. That's when we see like again the cross being replaced with a sword in the hands of people, all of that kind of stuff. And I think in the United States, there's all kinds of entanglement of particularly evangelical Christianity with Christian nationalism, with this idea of the America First rhetoric and the resurgence of fascism. Like all of that is wound up in, not all, the vast majority of it is wound up if it's wrapped up in Christianity, and so. I mean, the reason the KKK burns a cross is because they're Christian or whatever, right? Like, and so I just think it's fascinating. I'll say this: I think it's fascinating that our holy books, the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Quran, were all authored by people who were in positions of relatively low social privilege. I know the what we have today as the Hebrew Bible was at least edited and compiled in the wake of exile, right? By those communities, Eli, that you were talking about. The first, and Abdullah, you'll have to, my Islamic history is worse than my Jewish history, but I mean, how many years were the prophets allies and descendants kind of marginalized and fighting for their lives while they were also trying to preserve Muhammad's teachings, right?
Well, no, actually, Islam is a bit unique in that sense, because for after the Prophet's death, the original words of the Quran, we believe, our opinion is and this is what we hold firm to, is that it has been intact since the time it was revealed by God to Prophet Muhammad. That is what the Quran is.
Right, but wasn't Muhammad persecuted when he was trying to spread Islam? That's what I was saying. Right, was like
every in our understanding of religion, every person that came to represent God has been persecuted in one form or another, except a couple of people. One of them is Adom, and the other one is King David, or Dawood in our in Arabic. So
wait. You guys say that David was not persecuted?
In the sense that King David.
Yeah, but he lived his whole life in fear of Saul. He was literally running. He was scared for his life.
I'm sorry. I would say not David. Solomon.
Oh yeah, that guy.
Sorry. I apologize. I didn't mean David.
Fair enough. But you actually raises a point that I wanted to mention that's very on point to this. And I think I told this to you once, Jer. The Talmud says that if a person says that they are a descendant of the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, they're not Jewish. And if they say they're Jewish, they're a liar. So the Talmud explains because
I don't understand what that meant. What that
okay.
means.
So you familiar with the Maccabees, Hasmoneans?
I'm not.
Okay, so there was a story it's in the New Testament, but it happened to the ancient Jews. The Greeks, Syrian Greeks, they wanted Jerusalem. They took it. They defiled the temple. The Jews fought back, valiantly won a war of very few against very many, and they lit a candle in the temple. This is where you see all these Jewish people lighting candles for Hanukkah. That's celebrating this holiday. Okay, so the heroes of that story are the Maccabees, and their family name was Hasmonean. They were Hasmoneans, okay? They were like the premier Jewish family at the time, okay? So, and the Talmud, written a couple hundred years later, says that if somebody tells you that they're from Hasmonean descent and they're claiming to be Jewish, they're a liar. meaning there's no Jewish Hasmoneans. Okay? So the Talmud explains what that means. It means that their entire family assimilated and lost their Jewishness, right? So how did that happen? So it's very easy to understand. In the Old Testament, right? There's meant to be, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but I'll say it as if you are. There's supposed to be 2 tribes that are like the leaders of the Jewish people. There's the Levites, they're like the religious leaders, and there's Judah, who is the king and the monarchy. Now, why didn't the same tribe get both? So we have a very, very strong belief in a separation of church and state, to borrow a term. You can't be the political leader and be the religious leader of the same place, because that is a recipe for failure. The Hasmoneans were Levites.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the ones who fought back. They cared, their jobs were at stake. If the temple's destroyed, they got nowhere to work. So they were like, we need a job. So they fought and they won. And instead of being like, we won, let's find some Judean descendants, King David's grandchildren, to be the kings or to be the monarch or to be the leader. They're like, we'll do it. No problem. So the Hasmoneans became the leaders and the priests. And within 4 or 5 generations, when this Talmudic statement was written, they were all gone. In fact, the Talmud says that when the temple was being destroyed, it was burning. Okay? The Romans destroyed the temple. It was burning. The last descendant of the Hasmoneans, her name was Bilga. Her name was Bilga. She was sitting on top of the altar, kicking it with her feet, saying, Lucas, Lucas, which in ancient Latin, whatever language it was, ancient Greek means wolf, wolf. Wolf, wolf. How long are you going to eat your people for? She was like blaming the altar for the destruction of the temple, kicking it with her feet, the ultimate desecration. That was the last Hasmonean. So it's a very strong endorsement of what everybody here is saying, which is that political and religious leadership don't mix well together. They become very corrupted. The political leadership becomes harsh in religious terms, and the religious leadership becomes tainted by political means.
I want to just take a quick historic step back from an Islamic perspective. So after the Prophet's death, you had the Khalifa, or where the ISIS used the term. Khalifa basically means representative. Every Muslim is also considers themselves a Khalifa. And Khalifa of what or who? Khalifa of God, in the sense that through the Prophet Muhammad, through the tradition, in terms of service. So we believe when Adam was created, God asked the angels to look, he had a conversation with the angels to say that I'm creating this creation that is going to be serving on earth to serve me. And for us as Muslims, we consider ourselves as Khalifa, as ambassadors, as individuals that are supposed to serve God. And that means that we do have this philosophical or spiritual understanding of being part of this empire, but we call it a community. In other words, in Arabic, you might have heard this word, ummah, which is technically in English means community, but you can also call it an empire. But this empire or this community is about serving God's will. So after the Prophet's death, the first Khalifa, the first representative, first leader of the Muslim world was Abu Bakr, the Prophet's best friend. And 2, 3, 4 people afterwards, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, they were considered known as Khulafa al-Rashidin, meaning the rightly guided representatives. Afterwards, you've had different empires come into the Muslim world, all the way up to the Ottoman Empire. It was Muslims that were ruling these Muslim empires but they were ruling these empires based on their own geopolitical understanding or situation, and desires many times. Because again, it's, as I've mentioned in the beginning, there are Muslims all the way from Morocco to China, or from in Asia and Africa. Yet you had this huge empire that said they were one. So what really unified them was the religious identity, but the political identity was being these political leaders were subjugating the Muslims, or subjugating its citizens through the understanding or the unification of this of the religion. So I think in modern day, I would equate that to citizenship. So when you hear, let's say, for instance, a Muslim, the crime, or so the punishment for a Muslim who leaves Islam is death. Or let's say, for instance, a person that doesn't do this and that, the punishment is a severe punishment. They go back and say, hey, look, this is what Islam tells you because of its original text. Well, it's true, but you also need to look at the text on what the context was. So a Muslim that was part of the Islamic empire during the Abu Bakr's time, their citizenship, their oath of allegiance, their taxes, and all those things were both connected in religion as well as on the statehood. But in modern times, that is not the same case. So if I go against the United States, I'm committing treason. If I went against the state that Abu Bakr led by saying that I'm no longer a Muslim, I'm committing treason. So that same, if you take that same concept and apply it, or let's say, Al Capone, or the biggest crime in America is not to pay your taxes, right? Or cheat on your taxes. So you go to jail for that. In Islam, you went to war for not paying your zakat, or not paying the amount of money that you need to do, because that is taxes, although it gets mingled up and changed depending on how you want to come and attack, instead of trying to understand and comprehend. So from I know it may sound very complicated, but it isn't at the end of the day. I think it is, you are going to be judged in our religion, in our faith, and our understanding based on where you stand and what you do on the day of judgment, when God will be the ultimate judge. And the judgment is, how did you serve the responsibilities and roles that you had. You're not going to be judged whether did you take over the world. No, you're going to be judged on the responsibilities and the rules and obligations that you had. Did you fulfill that properly? Did your neighbor get taken care of? Did you tend to the needs of your family, instead of what did you do around the world?
I'm curious. I just wonder in my head, like as I'm hearing this, how many Muslims take it fundamentally, like the way that you're saying that we misinterpret it, like us observers, outsiders. How many insiders are fundamentalist about these things also? They're like, they want to have a country where you can kill somebody for treason. I'm just curious because, like you said, people don't read, right? I know in my religion, so many people are either so ignorant that they don't do anything, or they're so ignorant that they do way too much, right? It's so you're talking in a very moderated way, which I love to hear. I wonder what the fundamentalists out there would say if they would hear what you're saying right now.
I'm not actually speaking moderate. I'm speaking based off of the text.
Moderately means comparatively towards the people that are more extreme on this side and the more that are more lazy
I
on
understand. I don't mean it from a political perspective. I mean, I don't consider myself to be a conservative or liberal or a moderate on this specific issue. I want to, whatever I say, let's say, for instance, how I mistakenly said David and you corrected me. I'm like, I am there to correct myself immediately if I don't have evidence behind what I'm saying. So for my position, or the position that most Sunni Muslims take, especially a practicing Sunni Muslim, is not based on what the habit of their forefathers has been. It is based on, when we say tradition, when we say this is how the tradition is, it is not the tradition or the culture, it is the tradition of the text, meaning what the scholars of Islam, religious Islam, have stated. This is how you follow Islam, based on the evidence or based on the text that our religious scholars have written. So when I say I am a fundamentalist, it is not in the same context of what is understood for in Christian terms. It is not the same way as when you would say that about ISIS or any other groups. I'm a fundamentalist in the sense that I believe in fulfilling the fundamental principles of Islam.
Yeah, that's not what it means.
My understanding is that you take the text, not modernize it, but you take the text and see how that is applicable in the modern context. So you take the text, but that does not mean that, let's say, for instance, for Muslims, there are certain things that you have to do, and if you do not do, you are not fulfilling the regulations of Islam. First and foremost, the shahada, the utterance of faith. Second, praying 5 times a day, and within Sunni Islam, there is a guideline. This is how you pray. There are people that are on the outskirts that have a different of opinion. That's not where we stand. We have a specific tradition that this is how you pray. This is the time you pray. This is how, when, and where, and how, and what are the rituals before and after that you have to fulfill. You have to fast in the month of Ramadan. You can fast in other times, but no, this is what, and these are the rules and regulations of fasting. Then you have to give your alms or zakat, similar to the zakat or charity that Jews and Christians do. And the last one is Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca at a specific time. All these things are mandatory depending on your financial or capable situation. Everything else is up to interpretation. Everything else is like you can negotiate. But these 5 points that I made is really not negotiable in our understanding. These are fundamental things that you cannot cross. Everything else, you can have whatever you want to, however way you want to look at it. You can have, difference of opinions. You can have, some can agree, some cannot. It doesn't matter. But those 5 things, there is no, and if there is a disagreement, let's say, on those 5 points, then they're not Sunni Muslim. They're not within the traditional Islam. They're not within the bounds of Islam.
So no atheist Sunni Muslims.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Just to bring it all back, no atheist Sunni Muslims.
Funny enough, as I've traveled around the world, in these Sunni majority countries, there are a lot of atheists and agnostics who, in their, let's say, government consensus or census, they are Muslim, but when it comes to interaction or when they identify themselves, they consider themselves to be atheist or agnostic. So in terms of their identification on a government level or in a political level, they're Muslim, but when it comes to their actual practice, they're not. So same thing here in America, actually. Yep. To me, I find it absurd when someone says, again, this is my personal opinion, but I also have the text to back me up. When someone says, I'm a half Christian and a half Muslim, I don't know how can that be? It's like when I just saw the other day, someone said, I'm half Indian, half Pakistani, or half Bangladeshi and half Pakistani. I'm like, my friend, those are 2 different nationalities. It is not, you can't be 2 different countries. You can be 2 different ethnic groups. You can have mixed in there, but not in nationalities. Unless you have 2 different passports, that's a different story. So
But then you're hardly half an app. Anyway, well,
Yeah.
hey, it is almost 10 o'clock Central, which I know is even later for Eli out on the East Coast. So I want to wrap us up. But again, further evidence that we should hang out more often, gentlemen. This has been a delightful time, and I feel like we were just getting rolling. We could have probably done this all night. So thank you all so much. Thank you to all of you who stuck around the whole time too. What a treat. Jeremy, this is what you get for asking great questions. So thanks for that as well. This will stay on the internet as long as the internet's around, or until Skynet takes it down, I guess. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much. You all have seen the donation links. You've seen where you can follow these guys online as well. I just want to say again, on behalf of Haven, thanks for joining us for this event. And yeah, please make it a point this week to be a good neighbor and be a good friend, because we need more of that in the world. We need to create some more peace. So blessings to everyone. Thank you again for being with us. And we will see you at the next event. I hope